Too. They usually call me the Renegade Pastor, but we're out here at Diamond Craters in Oregon, and as you can see behind me, it's beautiful volcanic upthrust and just an amazing topography, and not many people know about it, and it's pretty quiet out here. There's coyotes, rattlesnakes, and us, and that's about it. But one of the things that struck me looking at this was when we were driving in, there was a lot of what looked to be stratified topography, and it reminded me a lot of the flood and what Peter talked about. Peter says that men are willfully ignorant of God's judgment. And when you look at something like this, as beautiful it is, you have to stop and think, what was this like when this thing went off? It's an amazing thing. And we're pretty much in the center of a supervolcano, kind of the ancient version of what Yellowstone is today. And it's a reminder that God does judge sin. And here we have a 60-mile wide crater, caldera. A lot of folks look at it as an ice form, but I'm looking at a lot of these rocks. I'm seeing a lot of jagged rocks. I'm seeing a lot of things that are burnt and on fire. Could be had some fire and ice, but I would contend that this is probably God's judgment and God's working when He records it in the days of Peleg and the days of Noah, and where we have a remnant of this. And that's what Peter talks about. He says, look around you. Don't be willfully ignorant of the fact that God does judge sin. And one of the things that we have to look at as Christians, and I'm talking to the saints now, so I hope those that are watching, if you're not a believer in Christ, we certainly invite you to be that, not for religious reasons, but because of what we're about to talk about. The whole reason God created us is for a relationship with Him. When we are operating as believers in Christ, and we just do the mundane day-to-day, and we think that because we have our salvation, we're good to go. And God says nothing could be further from the truth. If you read the 7 letters to the 7 churches in Revelation, and you read the epistles of Peter, you can't help but walk away with a sense God judges the iniquity of not only the unsaved, but of His people. When you read Genesis, and what I'm about to say is controversial, I get it, but I'll ask you to sidestep the arguments and go to the point of focus. And that is, when God talks about sons of God in Genesis, He's talking about people that did not obey what He said, even though they professed God. And Jesus goes to reference that in the Gospels. He says, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. And if you take that and you look at the 7 letters to 7 churches, you cannot help but come back with the idea that God is going to judge His people, because judgment must begin at the house of God. So we daren't, as saints, get comfortable. God called us to be royal priests. He called us to be kings and priests in the earth. That's the second half of the salvation message. We're born again, we're saved from sin, and we're called to be royal priests. That's why Christ said we're co-heirs. That's why He put us in heavenly places in Christ Jesus. Paul says we are here with a purpose to be a royal priesthood. That's our calling. And I will tell you that God is not averse to resets. Now, we all have our crystal balls out saying it's the end of the world and Jesus is coming back, and He is. And we are at the end of the world. But here's the thing. How many times in history have people said we're at the end of the world? Quite a few. Anybody remember 88 Reasons Why Jesus Christ is going to come back in 1988? Oops, did I miss it? I don't think so. And nothing against the author. I'm just simply saying this, that we cannot say that we know the day or the hour. It's not going to happen. Now, when you look at this topography behind me, and you look at what God's done with Sodom and Gomorrah, even with Port Royal in more recent history, 1600s, I'd say recent, but when you're comparing Bible ages, it's recent. All right. Noah's Day, Tower of Babel, God reset things. And here's the issue. There's more Bibles, more churches, more Bible colleges, more missionaries, more outreach than ever before in the history of mankind. And yet the world is darker than it has ever been. So the question is, what is going on here? Has the salt lost its savor? Has the light been put under a bushel? Because if the salt was as salty as we say we are, the world would not be as dark as it is. Because the righteous, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. When the wicked bear rule, the people mourn. And you and I both know, those of you watching, that there's a lot of mourning going on. There's not a lot of rejoicing going on. The worldwide the mood is not a joyful one. And the saints have to understand that righteous being in authority means stepping up and sitting on that throne of a royal priesthood. And we have to understand that God calls us to do that. If Jesus Christ were to come back today, you have to look at not just your theology you've been taught, but look at what the Bible actually says in terms of the 7 letters to 7 churches. If you read what it says, and this is really going to blow stuff up, so I hope you'll be with me. If you read what it says, not everyone that names the name of Christ is going to escape tribulation period. Read it for what it says. I realize I've just blown up a big theology thing, and so I'll ask your pardon, if you will, for that. But I'm trying to get you to think. I'm trying to put a bookmark in today's date and say, wait a minute, what are we looking at? Because God can't have a reset without a rapture. And that's what we got to realize. And that's what this is telling us. That's exactly what this is telling us. Peter says, don't forget that God judged the earth. He says, I'll put you in remembrance constantly. Don't forget. Stay the course and be the royal priest God calls us to be. And by the way, it's Peter that talks about that. When you're looking at the Christian life, when you're looking at the Christian faith, when you're looking at what makes us who we are and the meaning of life, we have to look at the fact there's 8 billion people on the planet, and if Jesus Christ comes back today, most of them will go to hell. So the question I have, God's not willing that any should perish. God judges sin, absolutely. Why would God come back if most people would perish? You get my point. You say, well, a lot of people would perish in a reset. Yes, they would. But not all 8 billion. It would be the lesser of 2 evils. And I'm trying to get us to think. If we let the sin debt get too high because our salt has lost its savor, we are forcing God's hand for a reset. It could be the rapture. I'm not saying it's not. But it could be another Peleg incident. In fact, there are actual prophecies in Habakkuk and in the minor prophets that talk about when God is going to come down and walk through the earth in judgment, and he's going to make the ancient places, the ancient hills, the ancient volcanoes that have not erupted in forever and a day, he says those hills are going to erupt. We blow past that and say, well, it's just poetry or something that some old prophet said back in the day. We better pay attention. Because as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the coming of the Son of Man. And if there are prophets, and we call them the minor prophets, but if there are statements from those men way back that are saying there's going to come a time when God's going to come down and check things out. And he's going to do a reset. We ought to pay attention. What did God do before he destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah? He came down. What did he do before Tower of Babel? He came down. What's he going to do in the last days before the rapture? Is he just going to show up? or is he going to come down? And we need to think about that. I know this is not commonly taught. Again, please bear with me. But we have to understand the God who we serve. We have to know his mindset. We have to know his heart. We have to know how he works. And if he is capable of, and we believe he is, and if he has a history of, and we know he does, checking things out before he judges that. And by the way, when God judges, what does he do? He meets with an intercessor. He met with Abraham. He met with Moses. He understands the role of standing in the gap, because that's what he's told us to do. He designed it. And so as royal priests, we need to get out of the mindset of just chilling until Jesus gets us out of here. We need to get in the mindset of standing in the gap. I was reading the other day, and again, the prophets. But the Lord said to pastors, because you've not stood in the gap, I'm not going to count you with Israel. Israel, of course, being sons of God. Yes, that was an Old Testament reference, but we all know Israel means prince with God, or royal priest. And so these old statements that are buried under piles of theology and piles of books, and no one ever reads them, we ought to give them a second look. We need to take a close look in the mirror. Are we Laodicean? It's easy to point the finger at somebody else. But do I think I have everything down pat? Or am I willing to learn? If I think I have everything down pat, Jesus gives a warning. He says, you think you see and you're blind. You think you got the robe of righteousness, you're naked. You think you have an inheritance, you're poor. He says, I counsel you to buy of me gold tried in the fire, which is our faith, Paul talks about. Now, and Peter as well. Now, it's easy to read the letters of 7 churches and say, well, that's apostate church, that's not me. But read them. Are we Thyatira? Are we allowing worldly teachings? That's a whole subject in and of itself. Have we forgotten our first love? Which, by the way, is the authority of Christ. It's being that royal priest. Have we forgotten that? I'd say yes. Do we even have our lampstand, or has it been pulled? Are we Sardis? We have a name that we live. But in reality, we're dead. And Christ says to that church, he goes, if you overcome, I won't blot you out of the book of life. Meaning, if you don't overcome, I am going to blot your name out of the book of life. Now, that's not me scrambling the theology teaching. That's Jesus Christ himself. I encourage you to read it. It's a letter to Sardis. Are we of the Nicolaitans, where the people in the pew have no power? Who are we? Are we truly a Philadelphia church? Because if we are, we're going to stand in the gap. And with that, I'll leave you. Remember the judgment. I'll see you on the hilltop standing in the gap. God bless you.